everybody, and welcome to another ASMR video here on the channel. In tonight's video I've gone for slightly more, not really sinister lighting, but kind of dark and more shadowy, because tonight we're going to be talking about some true crime stories, and consider this your warning, they're going to be disturbing. I've done quite a few true crime ones now, and obviously a lot are centered on murder, but tonight we're going to be looking specifically only at unsolved, disturbing murder cases. So if that's really not your thing, I'd suggest going and finding another one of my videos or somebody else's videos. I don't judge. But if you want to hear some true unsolved crimes, then this is the video for you. So for those of you with a strong heart and who are brave, I hope you enjoy the video. We begin with the gruesome story of the Black Dahlia murder and why the case remains unsolved to this day. On January 15th, 1947, 22-year-old aspiring actress Elizabeth Short was found brutally murdered in Los Angeles, with her body cut in half and a ghastly smile carved into her face. The 1947 murder of Elizabeth Short, also known as the Black Dahlia, is one of the oldest cold cases in Los Angeles. Not only was it a horrific crime, but it's also proven notoriously difficult to solve. In the decades since the Black Dahlia murder, police, the press, and amateur sleuths alike have all delved deep into this unsolved crime and developed several convincing theories. Though we may never know who killed the Black Dahlia, poring over the evidence of this case is just as darkly fascinating today as it was in 1947. So, on January 15th, 1947, Elizabeth Short's dead body was found in the LA neighborhood of Leimert Park. The first person who reported the grisly sight was a mother out for a morning walk with a child. According to the woman, the way Short's body had been posed made her think that the corpse was a mannequin at first, but a closer look revealed the true horror of the Black Dahlia crime scene. The 22-year-old Short had been sliced in two at the waist and completely drained of blood. Some of her organs, such as her intestines, had been removed and neatly placed underneath her buttocks. I did warn you. Pieces of flesh had been cut away from her thighs and breasts, and her stomach was full of feces, leading some to believe that she'd been forced to eat them before she was killed. The most chilling mutilations, however, were the lacerations on her face. The killer had sliced each side of her face from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating what's known as a Glasgow smile. Since the body had already been washed clean, LA Police Department detectives concluded that she must have been killed elsewhere before being dumped in Leimert Park. I'm probably butchering that, by the way. Near her body, detectives noted a heel print and a cement sack with traces of blood that had presumably been used to transport her body to the vacant lot. The LAPD reached out to the FBI to help identify the body by searching their fingerprint database. Short's fingerprints turned up rather quickly because she had applied for a job as a clerk at the commissary of the US Army's Camp Cook back in 1943. And then her print stand up a second time, since she'd been arrested by the Santa Barbara Police Department for underage drinking, just 7 months after she'd applied to that job. The FBI also had her mugshot from her arrest, which they provided to the press. Before long, the media began reporting every salacious detail they could find about Short. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's mother, Phoebe Short, didn't learn of her daughter's death until reporters from the LA Examiner telephoned her, pretending that Elizabeth had won a beauty contest. They pumped her for all the details they could get on Elizabeth before revealing the terrible truth. That's horrendous. That is absolutely horrendous. That shocked me more than the actual murder. That's terrible. Her daughter had been murdered and her corpse had been dismembered in unspeakable ways. As the media learned more about Elizabeth Short's history, they began to brand her as a sexual deviant. One police report read, "This victim knew at least 50 men at the time of her death, and at least 25 men had been seen with her in the 60 days preceding her death. She was known as a teaser of men." They gave Short the nickname the Black Dahlia due to her reported preference for wearing a lot of sheer black clothing. This was a reference to the movie The Blue Dahlia, which was out at the time. Some people spread the false rumour that Short was a prostitute, while others baselessly claimed that she liked to tease men because she was a lesbian. Adding to her mystique, Short was reportedly a Hollywood hopeful. She had moved to LA just 6 months before her death and worked as a waitress. Sadly, she had no known acting jobs, and her death became her one claim to fame. But as famous as the case was, authorities had tremendous difficulty figuring out who was behind it. However, members of the media did receive a few clues. On January 21st, about a week after the body was found, the Examiner received a call from a person claiming to be the murderer, who said he would be sending Short's belongings in the mail as proof of his claim. Shortly thereafter, on the 24th, the Examiner received a package with Short's birth certificate, photos, business cards, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen on the cover. Also included was a letter pasted together from newspaper and magazine letter clippings that read, "Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles print papers. Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." All of these items had been wiped down with gasoline, leaving no fingerprints behind. Though a partial fingerprint was found on the envelope, it was damaged in transport and never analysed. On January 26th, another letter arrived. This handwritten note read, "Here it is. Turning in Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police. Black Dahlia Avenger." The letter included a location. Police waited at the appointed time and place, but the author never showed. Afterward, the alleged killer sent a note made of letters cut and pasted from magazines to the Examiner that said, "I've changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified." Yet again, everything sent by the person had been wiped clean with gasoline, so investigators couldn't lift any fingerprints from the evidence. At one point, the LAPD had 750 investigators on the case and interviewed more than 150 potential suspects linked to the Black Dahlia killing. officers heard more than 60 confessions during the initial investigation, but none of them were considered legitimate. Since then, there have been more than 500 confessions, none of which led to anyone being charged. As time went on and the case went cold, many people assumed that the Black Dahlia murder was a date gone wrong, or that Short had run into a sinister stranger late at night while walking alone. After over 70 years, the Black Dahlia murder case remains open, but in recent years a couple of intriguing and chilling theories have emerged. So we begin with the man who thinks his father killed Elizabeth Short. Shortly after his father's death in 1999, now retired LAPD detective Steve Hodel was going through his dad's belongings when he noticed 2 photos of a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Elizabeth Short. After discovering these haunting images, Hodel began using the skills he had gained as a policeman to investigate his own deceased father. Hodel went through newspaper archives and witness interviews from the case, and even filed a Freedom of Information Act to obtain FBI files on the Black Dahlia murder. He also had a handwriting expert compare samples of his father's writing to the writing on some of the notes sent to the press from the alleged killer. The analysis found a strong possibility that his father's handwriting matched, but the results were not conclusive. On the grislier side, the Black Dahlia crime scene photos showed that Short's body had been cut in a manner consistent with hemicorporectomy, a medical procedure that slices the body beneath the lumbar spine. Hodel's father had been a doctor who attended medical school when this procedure was being taught in the 1930s. Additionally, Hodel searched his father's archives at UCLA, finding a folder full of receipts for contracting work on his childhood home. In that folder, there was a receipt dated a few days before the murder for a large bag of concrete, the same size and brand as a concrete bag found near Elizabeth Short's body. By the time Hodel began his investigation, many of the police officers who were originally worked on the case were already dead. However, he carefully reconstructed conversations these officers had about the case. Eventually, Hodel compiled all his evidence into a 2003 bestseller called Black Dahlia Avenger: The True Story. While fact-checking the book, Los Angeles Times columnist Steve Lopez requested official police files from the case and made an important discovery. Shortly after the murder, the LAPD had 6 main suspects, and George Hodel was on the list. In fact, he was such a serious suspect that his home was bugged in 1950, so the police could monitor his activities. Much of the audio was innocuous, but one chilling exchange stood out. 8:25 p.m. Woman screamed again. It should be noted the woman not heard before the scream. Later that day, George Hodel was overheard telling someone, "Realised there was nothing I could do. Put a pillow over her head and cover her with a blanket. Get a taxi." Expired 12:59. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, now they may have figured it out. Killed her. He continued, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." even after this shocking revelation, which seems to support that George Hodel killed Short, and possibly also his secretary, the Black Dahlia case still hasn't been officially closed. However, this hasn't stopped Steve Hodel from investigating his father. He says he has found details from dozens of other murders that could possibly be connected to his father, implicating him not only as the Black Dahlia murderer, but also as a deranged serial killer. Hodel's research has even garnered some attention from law enforcement. In 2004, Stephen R. Kay, the head deputy for LA County's District Attorney Office, said that if George Hodel was still alive, he would have enough to indict him for the Elizabeth Short murder. Interesting. I mean, that sounds pretty damning. Pretty damning. But I guess we'll never know. Or maybe we will one day. Maybe there'll be another update in the future. But yeah, a nice cheery one to start off with, as warned. Up second we have the Keddie murders. The Keddie murders. The Keddie murders are an unsolved quadruple homicide that occurred over the night of April 11th to 12th, 1981 in Keddie, California. The victims were Glenna Susan Sharp, daughter Tina Louise Sharp, son John Stephen Sharp, and John's friend Dana Hall Wingate. So, in July 1979, Glenna Susan, or Sue Sharp, along with her 5 children, left her home in Connecticut after separating from her husband James Sharp. They relocated to Northern California, where Sue's brother Don lived. Upon arriving in California, she rented a small trailer formerly occupied by her brother at the Claremont Trailer Village in Quincy. The following fall, she moved to house number 28 in the rural Sierra Nevada railroad town of Keddie. The house was much larger than the trailer and had become available when Plumas County's Sheriff Sylvester Douglas Thomas vacated the property. She resided there with her 15-year-old son John, 14-year-old daughter Sheila, 12-year-old daughter Dina, and 2 younger sons Rick, aged 10, and Greg, aged 5. On April 11th, 1981, at around 11:30 a.m., Sue, Sheila, and Greg drove from the residence of their friends, the Meeks family, to retrieve Rick, who had been attending baseball tryouts at Gansner Field in Quincy. They happened upon John and his friend Dana Wingate hitchhiking at the mouth of the canyon from Quincy to Keddie, and then drove them about 6 miles away to Keddie. 2 hours later, at around 3:30 p.m, John and Dana hitched back to Quincy, where they may have had plans to visit friends. Around this time, the boys were seen in the city's downtown area. That same evening, Sheila had plans to spend the night with the Seabolt family, who lived in the adjacent number 27, while Sue remained at home with Rick, Greg, and the boys' young friend Justin Smart. Sheila departed House 28 shortly after 8 p.m. to sleep at the Seabolts. Dina, who had been watching television at the Seabolt residence, returned to number 28 after asking what time it was at 9:30. At approximately 8 a.m. on the morning of April 12th, Sheila returned to number 28 and discovered the dead body bodies of Sue, John and Dana in the house's living room. All three had been bound with medical tape and electrical cords. Dina was absent from the home, while the three younger children, Rick, Greg and Justin, were found physically unharmed in an adjacent bedroom. Upon discovering the scene, Sheila rushed back to the Seabolt's house, and Jamie Seabolt retrieved Rick, Greg and Justin through the bedroom window. He later admitted to having briefly entered the home through the back door to see if anyone was still alive, potentially contaminating evidence in the process. The murders of Sue, John and Dana were especially vicious. 2 bloodied knives and 1 hammer were found at the scene. Blood spatter evidence from inside the house indicated that the murders had all taken place in the living room. Sue was discovered lying on her side near the living room sofa, nude from the waist down, and gagged with a blue bandana and her own underwear, which had been secured with tape. She had been stabbed in the chest and her throat was stabbed horizontally, the wound passing through her larynx and nicking her spine, and on the side of her head was an imprint matching the butt of a Daisy 880 Powerline BB pellet rifle. John's throat was slashed. Dana had multiple head injuries and had been manually strangled to death. John and Dana suffered blunt force trauma to their heads caused by 1 or more hammers. Autopsies determined that Sue and John had died from the knife wounds and blunt force trauma, and Dana died by asphyxiation. Sheila and the Seabolt family heard no commotion during the night. A couple living in nearby house number 16 was awakened at 1:15 a.m. by what sounded by muffled screaming. Justin's stepfather Martin Smart, a neighbour and main suspect, claimed that a claw hammer had inexplicably gone missing from his home. In addition to interviewing the Smarts, detectives interviewed numerous other locals and neighbours. Several, including members of the Seabolt family, recall seeing a green van parked at the Sharps' house at around 9 p.m. Justin offered conflicting stories of the evening and stated that he had dreamed details of the murders. In his later account of events, told under hypnosis, he claimed to have seen Sue with 2 men. Based on Justin's descriptions, composite sketches of the 2 unknown men were produced by Harlan Embry, a man with no artistic ability and no training in forensic sketching. It was never explained why, with access to the Justice Department and the FBI's top forensic artist, law enforcement chose to use an amateur who sometimes volunteered to help local police. In press releases accompanying the sketches, the suspects were described as in their late 20s to early 30s. One stood between 5 feet 11 inches to 6 feet 2 inches, tall with dark blonde hair, and the other between 5 feet and 6 inches, and 5 feet and 10 inches. Both wore gold-framed sunglasses. Rumours regarding the crimes being ritualistic or motivated by drug trafficking were dismissed by Plumas County Sheriff Doug Thomas, who stated in the week following the murders that neither drug paraphernalia nor illegal drugs were found in the home. So, we move on to the recovery of Dina Sharp's remains. Dina's disappearance was initially investigated by the FBI as a possible abduction, although it was reported on April 29, 1981, that the FBI had backed off the search, as the California State Department of Justice was doing an adequate job and made the FBI open search of the area covering a 5-mile radius around the house was conducted with police canines, but the efforts were fruitless. On April 11, 1984, a bottle collector discovered the cranium portion of a human skull and part of a mandible at Camp 18 near Feather Falls in neighbouring Butte County. The remains were confirmed by a forensic pathologist to be those of Dina in June 1984. Shortly after announcing the discovery, the Butte County Sheriff's Office received an anonymous call that identified the remains as belonging to Dina, but the call was not documented. A tape containing a recording of the call was found at the bottom of an evidence box at some point after 2013 by a deputy who was assigned to the case. And subsequent developments. The house in which the murders occurred was demolished in 2004. According to a 2016 article published by the Sacramento Bee, Martin Smart had left Keddie and driven to Reno, Nevada, shortly after the murders. While there, he sent a letter to his wife Marilyn, ruminating on personal struggles in their marriage, which he concluded by stating, "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." In a 2016 interview, Gamberg stated that the letter was overlooked in the initial investigation and was never admitted as evidence. He later criticised the quality of the initial investigation, saying, "You could take someone just coming out of the academy and they'd have done a better job." A counsellor whom Smart regularly visited also alleged that he admitted to the murders of Sue and Dina, but claimed, "I didn't have anything to do with the boys." He allegedly told the counsellor that Dina was killed to prevent her from identifying him, as she had witnessed the whole thing. John Bubede, another suspect who was in the same neighbouring cabin as Smart, allegedly had ties to organised crime in Chicago. He died in 1988. On March 24, 2016, a hammer matching the description of the one Smart had claimed to have lost was discovered in a local pond and taken into evidence by Plumas County Special Investigator Mike Gamberg. Plumas County Sheriff Greg Hagwood, who was 16 years old at the time of the murders and knew the Sharp family, stated the location it was found. It would have been intentionally put there. It would not have been accidentally misplaced. Gamberg also stated that at that time 6 potential suspects were being examined. In April 2018, Gamberg stated that DNA evidence recovered from a piece of tape at the crime scene matched that of a known living suspect. Moving on now. Next up, we have what we really know about the Setagaya family murder. So we're following up a family murder with another one. Great. On December 30th, 2020, one of the most infamous criminal cases in Japan's history has turned 20 years old. A senseless murder of a family of 4 in Tokyo's neighbourhood of Setagaya has caught both the Japanese and international public's attention, with countless amount of articles and podcast episodes dedicated to this tragedy. However, the passage of time, and in the case of international publications, the language barrier has muddled many details and blown some up. I decided to put my language skills to use and write down a synopsis of the case as accurately and comprehensively as I could, basing it only on reputable Japanese sources. This means those familiar with this unsolved mystery may find some frequently shared information missing. It could be because I simply missed them, they are false, or Japanese police didn't perceive them as important. With all that said, is the story of the Miyazawa family. When the Miyazaki family moved to Kamisoshigaya Street in 1991, the place was bustling with houses, with over 200 residential buildings scattered in the vicinity. The four of them, the father, office worker Miyazawa Mikio, his wife Yasuko, home tutor, daughter Nina aged 8 and son Ray aged 6, lived in a small, cramped space. At the back, the house was neighbouring a part of a park where little kids played called Choo Choo Train Park. Soon, Miyazawas started to lose more and more of their neighbours, who sold their land to the city. Tokyo already had plans for this area to expand nearby Soshigaya Park. By the time the year 2000 rolled by, there were only 4 houses left. One of them belonged to Yasuko's older sister Anne, but for most of the time it was occupied by the sister's mother. Anne and her son spent 8 years living in England and only got back to Setagaya in the spring of 2000. Her husband was an engineer at a big automobile company, and he was often overseas. This nearly empty home was the place where Yasuko could tutor children. She didn't have a lot of distance to cover. The 2 buildings were so close they could be mistaken for a semi-detached house. This close proximity had Mikio feeling uneasy. He worried it could lead to family troubles in the future. He proposed soundproofing both places. Anne agreed. Both families, just like their neighbours, planned to eventually move away from Kamisoshigaya and had already sold off their land to the city. But Yasuko was hesitating. She worried about her children acclimating to a new place, especially since her youngest Ray had a development disorder. In the end, they never got to move. On the night of 30th December, the Miyazawa family's quiet life was cut short. So, the more time passes, the less is certain about the murderer's actions. According to the most widely accepted version, he enters Miyazawa's house through a small window on the second-floor bathroom. The perpetrator's first target is Ray's bedroom, located right next to the bathroom. He finds the youngest one sleeping and strangles him. Ray is the only victim killed by strangling, and the only one who doesn't have any stab wounds or any blood stains on his body. It's in this bedroom where police find the most footprints. The next victim is thought to be the father, Mikio. Police assume that before the assault he was on the first floor working. His body was found on the first floor right next to the stairs. He has many wounds, mainly in the thighs and buttocks area. The stab wounds were also found on both arms, chest and face. His cause of death was ruled to be a blood loss resulting from chest stab wounds. Police find a fragment of sashimi knife, the murder weapon, in his skull. The last victims are mother and daughter who are sleeping together in the attic, accessible by a foldable ladder located on the second floor. They are stabbed multiple times, mainly in the face and neck area, first with a broken sashimi knife and then an all-purpose kitchen knife he must have gotten from Miyazawa's house. It might be during the time the perpetrator took to grab the knife, Yasuko decided to run with Nina. Bleeding heavily, she took Nina in her arms and carried her down the stairs. The criminal must have noticed them and delivered the final blow. Both bodies were found crouched with their backs touching. Nina died last. Her cause of death was determined to be cervical spinal cord injury caused by a backstab wound. Additionally, her first and third tooth were found missing, which also suggests she was not only stabbed but beaten. After killing the family, the perpetrator went to Miyazawa's kitchen area. He took out a few small cups of ice cream from the fridge. Strangely, he didn't use a spoon. Instead, he squeezed the containers upwards and proceeded to bite the ice cream. For a drink, he chose barley tea, ignoring cola and beer left in the fridge. The kitchen is also where he had found a band-aid which he used to try to patch a wound on his right hand. At one point, he rummaged through the family's documents from the first floor storage. He pulled out all of the drawers and took one of them to the second floor bathroom. He dumped the inside into the bathtub. Yasuko's personal belongings from her 2 handbags, Mikio's wallet, house keys and various documents met a similar fate. The perpetrator threw them into the toilet where he previously took care of his business. Other items like a white towel smeared with the perpetrator's blood and an empty cup of ice cream were also dumped in. What we know for sure is the criminal was still at Miyazawa's house at 1 AM. At 1:18 AM, he connected to the internet using Mikio's computer. During 5 minutes of usage, he created a new folder and visited a theatre's website. The site was bookmarked by Mikio. We don't know about his later whereabouts. For years, the public was meant to believe the perpetrator escaped in the morning due to the computer connecting to the internet for a second time around 10 AM. It wasn't until 2014 when the police have published a bombshell. The second connection was most likely an incident. The computer mouse found by the police has fallen under the table and connected to Mikio's company's website, which was set as Mikio's homepage. Japanese police have run an experiment using the exact type of Macintosh computer that Miyazawa family had used. They concluded the most probable outcome was Yasuko's mother dropping a mouse by accident when she found the bodies, therefore connecting to the internet. This information complicated an already difficult case. The previous theory didn't leave a lot of time for the culprit. Yasuko's mother came to her daughter's house after 10 AM to check on them. One of Miyazawa's family's relatives called the police at 10:56 AM. This means if it were really the murderer accessing the internet, he would have little to no time to escape. With this theory being proven untrue, the perpetrator could have escaped at any time between 1:30 and 10 AM. The other troubling point is the criminal's point of entry. Did he really use the small bathroom window? One of the investigators in an interview with Excite magazine revealed that the police had some doubts about this. He himself found the perp's pristine state of clothes to be downright bizarre. His jacket and fanny pack bore no signs of abrasion or wear, and no linen or fibre was left on the window. The only other way in was the front entrance. The problem is that this door was locked. For this theory to be plausible, the murderer would have to be an acquaintance of the family. The kind who would be let in even first floor stairs. If the criminal wasn't an intruder, but truly someone who was invited in, he would have been expected to remove his shoes at the home's entrance. Bloody footprints could be explained by blood making stairs slippery, forcing him to wear shoes once again. One way or another he must have used the window in some way. Police noted the bathroom window was open, with the mosquito screen removed and lying outside. Additionally, under the window they found footprints of a size similar to the perpetrator's one. Broken tree branches near the park's fence are assumed to be his work as well. So, who's the perpetrator? Due to the unprecedented nature of the murder from the very beginning, a large group of policemen was involved. To this day, 280,000 of them tried to help solve the case. At first, investigators were hopeful. The perpetrator left fingerprints, footprints, and even a blood-stained towel, which showed he has an A blood type. Their expectations were quickly shattered. Over 5 million people had their fingerprints checked. Neighbours, all kinds of criminals, family, friends, ex-residents. Hospital patients with wounds on their hands. Police tried also DNA testing with 1.3 million tries. None of them matched. Researchers did find an intriguing piece of information. In 2005, they announced the perpetrator most likely having Southern Europe roots from his mother's side. They concluded that either his mother or one of his grandparents lived from a country close to the Adriatic Sea. His father, on the other hand, was an East Asian, so he could have been Japanese but also Korean or Chinese. Japanese police have asked South Korea for help with identifying the culprit. It was the first request of this kind, but it was ultimately refused by the South Korean government. Based on the physical strength needed to climb a fence and access the second floor window, police put the culprit in the 15 to 35 age bracket, with his height reaching around 170 centimeters. The hair strands found in his fanny pack suggest he had dark brown or black short hair. Some speculate the intruder has an army background due to his walk style. Small steps taken with back planted to a wall. According to one of the investigators, he could have walked like this to avoid slipping from the bloodied stairs. So, the police have created 3 possible motives: money, grudge, or one that is unknown to the authorities. The money theory tends to bring a lot of skeptics out. It's no wonder. The suspect only stole about 150,000 yen, which is around $1,500, from Miyazawa's house. Many doubt somebody would kill an entire family for an amount like this. The second motive, grudge. This is where the severity of the attacks come into play. Besides Ray, who was strangled, the rest of the family met a gruesome death, and a grudgesome one at that. Women being stabbed in the face area. Could it be a grudge he held towards one of them, or maybe he hated women? What makes this theory even more plausible is that out of 10 items left by the intruder, 5 could have been bought around Okigubo Station. Police think he may have lived on the west side of Tokyo and moved by JR Chuo Line and Kyo Line, which puts him not far away from Setagaya Park. However, there are people who doubt this theory. Some investigators suspected the intruder throwing away his stuff and destroying things could be camouflage and part of an elaborate plan to take police off his tracks. The strangeness of this murder leaves a lot of place for imagination. In reality, the murderer could have had an entirely different motivation. And that brings us on to the last resort. When everything goes wrong and the case goes cold, there is just one flicker of hope. Science. A research institute in Shizuoka is currently working on establishing a more detailed look of the burp based on DNA left at the crime scene. According to a scientist working on this case, there is a possibility of figuring out if the perpetrator had any illnesses, what's his skin colour, and even details about his facial features. Could this mean we will finally get an answer on who the culprit is? The police remain sceptical. Contrary to the United States, which was built on immigrants, Japan is a homogeneous country. That means there isn't a lot of interest in finding out the family roots. It's difficult to imagine a case like Golden State Killer happening, but it could be the very first step to uncovering the truth. And that, my friends, is going to do it for tonight. 3 pretty chilling and horrible cases. Let me know if you enjoy this, if you manage to find some relaxation in it. I know people do, because I have people asking for more true crime again and again and again. And let me know if you want another episode of this, because unfortunately our world is fucked and there are many, many, many more cases we could cover, essentially. But yeah guys, that is the end of this rather depressing, but hopefully somewhat relaxing ASMR video. I really hope you did enjoy it. If you did and you are able